I'd like to welcome you to the second in EarthX TV's new series pertaining to law and policy, which we've branded Law and Nature. Our first program on Election 2020 and the Future of Environmental Law was originally aired on October 27th and is available on demand. These Law and Nature programs are being developed by a blue ribbon council of prominent environmental lawyers from coast to coast and seek to provide a platform for environmental thought leaders to discuss legal and policy issues critical to environmental protection. As chair of our advisory council, I'm privileged to welcome to today's program one of our council members, Professor Dan Esty, the Hillhouse Professor of Environmental Law and Policy at Yale Law School and Yale School of the Environment. At Yale, Dan also serves as its director of its Center for Environmental Law and Policy and co-director of its Initiative on Sustainable Finance. From 2011 to 2014, Dan served as Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, where he earned a reputation for fresh thinking and practical results. Prior to taking up his Yale professorship in 1994, Dan served in a variety of senior positions at EPA, where he helped manage the agency's regulatory programs and negotiated the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change. He also worked as a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C., where he did breakthrough work on the links between trade and environmental issues and the broader challenges of globalization. Professor Esty is the author or editor of 12 books and dozens of articles on environmental protection, regulatory reform, energy policy, and sustainability metrics, and their connections to corporate strategy, competitiveness, trade, and economic success. Today's topic is Pathways to a Sustainable Future, lessons from Professor Esty's recent and very intriguing book, A Better Planet, 40 Big Ideas for a Sustainable Future. This session will explore options for new initiatives and progress across the country related to energy, environment, conservation, land use, and other sustainability issues. Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Really a pleasure to be with you.
And let's talk about your new book. What was the genesis? It's got an intriguing title. And who were some of the authors?
So, Jeff, this is a book that grew out of an effort at Yale to really begin to lay out an agenda for progress on sustainability. It gets beyond the usual political breakdowns and party divides and geographic concerns. And it really takes a step back and asks, what do we need from a scientific point of view, from a societal point of view, from a sustainability point of view? And with that, we developed this agenda with lots of ideas and really wanted to put forward. It's a team effort from a big group that begins at Yale, but includes folks from across the country and around the world on the idea that there is actually more common ground than people have sometimes given credit for in the environment or sustainability domain. And so this is an attempt to think about air pollution, water pollution, land use, conservation strategies. Climate change, of course, is one of the big issues, but the future of natural resource management, of climate change action in many different contexts, all of which we see as part of a pathway to a sustainable future. So it's a desire to really be broad gauge, to think about a menu of interesting prospects, recognizing that some will work in one part of the United States, some might work in another, some can work nationally, some can work globally. And some of the ideas are best taken up at the local or the state scale. So it really is an attempt to build a menu of interesting thoughts that various thought leaders can pick up and run with, that public officials can work with, that all of us can debate and perhaps push forward in our own way.
I'm intrigued by the notion of common grounds. How do you determine what are the issues on which people can agree before we decide how we move forward?
So what I would tell you is that I think there actually is at the highest level, sort of the level of principle, a lot of agreement. People want breathable air. They want drinkable water. They want swimmable rivers and lakes. They want an ocean that's protected from plastic. And they want an energy future that is going to ensure that we've got a way to deliver on society's needs, whether that's heating or cooling or cooking, or transportation, but also in a way that doesn't damage the planet in a fashion that might mean our children, grandchildren, and their children beyond don't live as well. So I think at the highest levels of principle, there actually is a lot of agreement. And what we've found at Yale is that when you get beyond the partisan battles and the political bickering, you can often get people to think together and find ways to move forward. And we see it on tough issues like climate change, where on a few issues, the Democrats and Republicans in the Congress have come together. But even more at the state level, you're finding strategies where people can agree on an agenda for clean energy, on new ways to finance solar arrays or wind turbines, and really trying to bring people together across some of those divides that have seemed impossible.
Well, that's a very heartening notion of where we might head in the future. Why do you think we haven't made more progress on sustainability and climate change, cleaning up the environment in the past?
I think the environment issue broadly became a partisan wedge issue a decade or 15 years ago. And so each of the parties found themselves in a place where they could rev up their base by talking about a certain perspective on these issues, blaming the other side for all kinds of horrors that it wanted to put forward, economic disaster on the one side, environmental disaster on the other. And I think as the nation moves beyond the election and into a mode of policy focus, beyond politics, but into sort of what's the agenda, I think there's a big opportunity for a book like this one. And again, we're bringing forward 40 different ideas from a whole range of perspectives on a wide variety of issues. And you don't have to agree with all of them to find some set that you might find exciting and attractive. So that's our goal, is to really start the policy engines firing and really gear us up for what I hope will be a robust debate in the months ahead about where we move as a nation, where some of our states will go with their sustainability agendas, and then beyond that, what the whole planet might do together, recognizing that on some of these issues, nothing short of action collaboratively at the global scale will suffice.
So we can think about how we move forward in terms of environmental protection, sustainability, and climate change. And on the one hand, we've got command and control, and on the other hand, we've got the marketplace. But your book talks about other ideas and other ways of moving things forward.
Well, I do think there's a place for command and control in some circumstances. I think there's a growing opportunity for market mechanisms. I do think, and this is one of the core ideas of the Better Planet book, that we should move toward an end to externalities. At least that's what economists call them. The idea that you can put smoke up a smokestack or pollution out an effluent pipe and not pay for it. And our traditional model of environmental law gave you a limit. You can pollute up to this amount, but not above. And my view is you should not get any amount of pollution for free. There should be a limit above which you can't go because it's a public health threat, but you should pay for all of your emissions up to that point. So I do think the idea of getting a market mechanism in place, a price on harm, is consistent with not only good policy, but it sharpens the incentives for care. And frankly, beyond for care, it sharpens the incentives for innovation. So every company that has got a pollution issue and is going to end up paying for it will be eager to think about new ways to do their production processes, new ways to think about how to imagine their products, all of which might reduce emissions, reduce the charges they're going to pay. And beyond every company thinking about their own issues, there will be lots of folks, entrepreneurial folks, inspired creative talents across the country who are saying, well, if I can solve somebody's problem, I'll be able to sell them the solution. So it could be a big spur to innovation. And the finding of my own research, and it's the centerpiece of my chapter in this book called Red Lights to Green Lights, is the focus on needing to shift our environmental law and policy framework towards more of a focus on innovation. My own research suggests that it is innovators that bring us to the ways around some of the intractable problems. It's how you get to a solution that is perhaps cheaper and better than the status quo. So I'm a big believer in innovation as a key to policy progress. And by the way, my own definition of innovation is not simply new technologies of the sort that people talk about, solar arrays or wind turbines. I'm a big believer in all kinds of innovation. So from an environmental point of view, we need not just new clean energy technologies, we need new supporting structures, better batteries, better storage, a smart grid, smart homes, smart appliances. And beyond that, we do need new government policies, innovation in how government does its part of the story, how it engages people, what incentives it puts out to the marketplace. And I would argue we need new finance. We need ways to get more capital flowing to sustainability solutions. Of course, we need that nationally, but we need it at the state and local level. And beyond that, we need it around the world, especially in the developing nations. We need, furthermore, ways to engage the public, to get all of us involved and recognize that each of us has part of the answer in our own homes and our own lives as to how we get to this sustainable future. So I am convinced, and I think the evidence is strong, that institutions that thrive, companies that move forward, governments that succeed, policy processes that deliver new and better solutions almost always are innovation focused. And it needs to be a much more central part of our law and policy framework.
Let me dive down, if I might, into the distinction between law and policy. To what extent do you think we need legislation on the federal, state, or local level to implement these policies? And to what extent might we encourage, or how might we encourage these policies to be implemented independent of law?
My own view is that there are good reasons to want this framed out in law, because it is law that is our structure of incentives that guides behavior in our own lives, in the marketplace, in all of the places that behavior needs to be shaped. So a legal framework is valuable, but it need not be a regulatory framework. So it doesn't have to always be old style, particularly command and control regulation, where the government is telling the regulated community, the business community, the industries, exactly what to do, or even telling them that they have to go out and adopt best available technology, which is the frame of so much environmental law. Instead, I think what we can do is begin to put information in the marketplace. So I'm a big believer, for example, in having a more robust structure of sustainability metrics about corporate performance. Environmental performance, social performance, governance structures. And if we had a reporting framework, perhaps backed up by law to the extent that it's put forward by our Securities and Exchange Commission as part of financial reporting for all publicly traded companies, I think we could get a much better picture of which companies are moving us toward a sustainable future. And frankly, that would inspire those who are interested in putting their money into a stock portfolio of sustainability leaders to shift their funds towards these enterprises that are seen as moving the nation and the world forward, moving us toward that innovation future. So I do think if we can put information out there, we can engage people on their own terms. And it's not only investors that might get excited, it's consumers. If the public were to know that certain companies were offering a more sustainable approach to X, Y, or Z issue, and they could buy products that supported that move towards a sustainable future, I think there's a growing percent of our public that would like to be part of that change and would like to be investing in and buying from companies that are moving us toward a sustainable day where a number of these problems are addressed.
And I take it you would say that there is movement even now without this statutory framework towards a market-driven sustainability. Is that correct?
Yes, Jeff, you're absolutely right. There are already lots of folks out there, especially in this world of sustainable investing. And that is one of the chapters in this Better Planet book, by the way, a very interesting piece by my colleague, Todd Court, about the need to put more information into the marketplace. But there's already a growing percent of the investing public that has basically told their investment advisors that they want better alignment between their values and their stock portfolios. And those folks care about different things. There's no single view of what sustainability is. Some care a lot about environment issues broadly. Some care about climate change in particular. Others care about the social agenda, about whether there's diversity in the workplace, about whether there's gender equity in pay scales, whether senior management has minority representation or women on its board, for example. So all of these issues relate to some part of that investing world. And there's a growing number of those investors saying, I want to see the data. Tell me about which companies are doing well on these issues and which not so well. And so even before there's a legal obligation, where before the SEC is weighed in, I think you're seeing some number of companies responding and putting more information out. And there's a growing number of investment advisors that are trying to really get their hands on sustainability performance metrics and make it part of their portfolio analysis.
So you talked about the metrics and you talked about internalizing externalities so that the costs of adversely impacting the environment are incorporated into the cost of doing business. Question for you, how would you go about quantifying what the costs are? Somebody makes a pair of shoes. Do you start with the cow and the emissions associated with it and work your way through? Do you look at the entire life cycle of the products? And is there a system for doing these types of evaluations that's generally accepted?
So Jeff, it's a great question, and it reflects the opportunity to take advantage of the enormous progress we've made as a society in the now, let's call it 50 years since we launched the modern environmental law program, roughly about 1970. We've just celebrated in the past year the 50th anniversary of the original Earth Day from 1970. We've also celebrated the 50th anniversary of our Environmental Protection Agency. And in those 5 decades, we've gotten much better at some of the things you've talked about, life cycle analysis in particular. We're much better at understanding where environmental impacts come from, how big they are, what the flow of those pollutants are, what a scientist would call the fate and transport of emissions. And we're much better at tracking that. And we simply have a much greater depth of epidemiological and ecological science on which to build in putting a price on those harms. So we couldn't have done this 50 years ago. We had to start out as we did with a Clean Water Act and a Clean Air Act that was a much simpler structure that actually put a lot of the weight on the US government, on the Environmental Protection Agency to figure out what to do and how to move forward. Today, I think we can shift the gears of that environmental regulatory framework broadly and of our EPA in particular, and move towards an agency that's much more centered on the kinds of questions you were asking me. Where are the harms coming from? Who do they affect? How big are they? How much risk do they pose? And then we put a value on that and send people out the bill and say, here's what it costs to do the kind of pollution you're doing right now. Cut it back, and of course, your bill goes down. And I think there is just ample evidence from many fields, not just the environmental arena, that when people have to pay for things, they're much more careful about it. And when they can get their bills cut by being more cautious and more appropriate, reducing the harm, they do so. And again, it spurs not only the company or the polluter, it spurs on the many others that might be able to provide a pathway to reduced emissions for all those companies. So I'm excited about that. And it does, I think, argue for bringing to bear good science, the kind of tools that have been developed in recent decades, and then really shifting the gears of what our Environmental Protection Agency looks like, who the people are that are there, what kinds of talents and skills and underlying disciplines need to be part of the structure. And it probably means moving away from the old EPA that was a lot of engineers trying to understand industry by industry where pollution improvements could come from, toward more epidemiologists, ecologists, risk analysts, who can give us a new set of frameworks to build our policies around.
That raises a question in my mind too. And how do we go from media to media, risk to risk, so we get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of the investments we make? So for example, if we could spend a certain amount of money on air pollution control versus the same amount of money in cleaning up a contaminant in our water, how do we compare apples and oranges to figure out what's the best way to proceed?
Well, I would be looking to put a price on the various harms. So I would put a price on air pollution, depending on how many people it affected, how much disease it was causing, how much mortality was being created. And by the way, not just actual deaths, but risk of death. You have to be able to steer people away from doing risky things. And with that, I don't think the EPA or the government has to be the line drawer. I think you're going to put a price on these harms, and now companies are going to have an incentive to invest to the greatest extent possible where they can cost effectively reduce their harms in taking down their emissions, whether it's air pollution or water pollution or greenhouse gases. And I think if there's a proper harm price on these different emissions, there will be a very strong incentive for companies to think about how to reduce them.
What do you see as the relative role of federal versus state versus local government versus companies, the marketplace versus NGOs and versus individuals? What is the role of each and how do they work together to achieve some of these objectives?
Well, another of the conclusions that my own research has led me to, and the Better Planet book spells out in some detail, is that we were way too dependent in our original structure of environmental law and policy, the framework built in the 1970s and 80s, on federal government as the actor from an environmental point of view. We now know that there's a big country out there, a lot of geographic diversity, and some problems are more serious in one part of the country than another. So there are a certain number of issues that we want state level leadership on, and in some cases, even local level. So I do think that we want a more federal structure. And that's the great strength of America going back for 200 years, that we do have these layers of government. We are able to manage as a very big country across a diverse geography, a continental geography, because we don't try to do it all on a centralized basis and with uniform rules. So I think there's a big opportunity for that kind of diverse structure. And some would view it as complicating. I view that as tailoring, making sure that we've got appropriate standards in different places and different problems. Now, of course, there are some issues where the harm is national or global, in which case you want a more nationally structured response strategy. I think greenhouse gases are well documented to cause the same amount of harm no matter where they're released from. So we should have a common price on those harms. But where the issue is local water pollution, and there's different kinds of rivers and streams, we might want to have a different pathway to setting the price and a different structure on those emissions. So I do think there's some flexibility here. There can be some diversity of approaches. And the idea is to make the response strategies more tightly tailored to the problems at hand. And in doing so, I think you're going to end up with a more effective and a more efficient environmental law and policy framework.
Do you see a role for fossil fuels in a carbon neutral future?
So my view is, and I in a prior life was the commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And one of the questions that people love to ask me, I would say the second most popular question, the first of which was, why are my electric rates so high? People always wanted that answer to that. The second one people would often ask me at public forums is, what is our energy future? Where are we going to be in 20 or 30 or 40 years? Will it be solar power or wind power? And I would say, let's not guess. Let's not have even the smartest people try to guess. Rather, let's run a clean energy race. And I would try to explain to people that no pathway forward was without challenges. Every clean energy opportunity had some difficulties to overcome. Solar and wind power have the issue of intermittency. What do you do when the wind's not blowing? What do you do when the sun's not shining? And the answer they have to address is to come up with better storage technologies, better batteries or something similar. If you're looking at some of the other options like wave power or tidal power, they have to figure out how to become cost effective, to actually capture more of the energy and to really be able to bring it ashore and transmit it in a way that can be cost competitive. So there are all different challenges, and almost everybody needs to bring their cost curves down. And I would say, in answer to the question, should nuclear power be in the mix? Of course they should, but with their own challenges. How do you manage the waste? How do you build a new plant that's cost effective? How do you prevent risk of terrorism? So there's real issues for nuclear. And the answer to your question is fossil fuels should also be in the race. And they have several layers of challenge. First of all, they have to make sure they're not creating a local air pollution of the kind that is challenging in the America of the past and now in the India and China of the present, where they're burning lots of coal in cities and they have terrible air quality. So there's got to be the local air pollution addressed. And then, frankly, the greenhouse gas emissions need to be captured and, as the science calls it, sequestered, stored away. And I do think that there is a lot of progress being made on carbon capture and storage. And so the answer would be, if that can be done cost effectively, and there are many people investing in that as a prospect, I think there is a role for the fossil fuels if they can address their local air pollution and their greenhouse gas emissions issues cost effectively. Is that a high probability? I don't know, but I think there are people who are betting on it. And in my mind, that's fantastic. I want all of these different clean energy pathways to the future to be invested in by somebody, the partisans who see that their own technology is the best way forward. Because I, again, don't want to be the one to guess whether it's going to be a transformed fossil fuel world or a world that's gone all solar or all wind, or for that matter, geothermal power or advanced biofuels. All of this should be in the debate, and all of which I think should be in the competitiveness race to see who can come down in cost and solve their problems for being the best path forward.
So, for example, we might have carbon capture and sequestration, but perhaps someone might develop a technology for extracting CO2 from the air, I suppose.
If you were, in fact, that is one of the big opportunities. Some people believe in this so-called direct air capture as the best path forward. I would be thrilled. By the way, there should be everyone cheering if that were to actually be done cost effectively, because it would mean we'd take our technology out across the world, and those Indians and Chinese who I was mentioning continue to burn coal would have a solution to their greenhouse gas emissions. And climate change is the classic issue where it doesn't help for any one country to fix its own problem. You got to get everybody in the world to move together. So it would be a great boon to our own economy if we were the ones to develop that technology, but to the global response to climate change more broadly.
So let's talk a little bit about the interrelationship among energy, water, and food, because it's great to be sustainable and to protect the climate, but people who need the energy for food, for water, how do we balance all those competing needs and make sure we provide for those who are in third world countries who don't have access to energy, which is critically important to quality of life? At the same time, we protect the climate.
Well, you've asked a very interesting multidimensional question there, which let me unpack for a moment if I can. First of all, you're absolutely right that we are going to have societies continue to need energy because it provides us with many things that define modern life. The ability to heat our homes on a cold winter day, to cool our homes on a warm summer day, to get food, to move to our jobs, to have transportation more broadly and the mobility that provides. So I think we all know that energy is foundational to the quality of life, and we are not going to succeed in a strategy that deprives others of it and of their aspiration to move towards the American quality of life, which is the envy of the world all over. So we're going to continue to have people want to have energy, and societies that are in what we now call energy poverty are the most likely to focus on needing new sources of energy. So I think there is a critical goal here of finding ways to break the link between energy and pollution. And that's why innovation has been such a focus. And it could be done, as I've just suggested, in any number of ways, but it is absolutely essential. And I think that as well, you correctly point out that a good bit of water supply has an energy component to it. So if we're going to take seriously the need to get to a more energy efficient future, the water dimension of the problem, the amount of energy spent pumping water, moving water, cleaning water has got to be part of the equation. And likewise, food is a very significant part of our lives. It's essential to our well-being, and yet it's also got a lot of pollution issues associated with it. Local pollution, as the farmer is growing the food and there's runoff going into local streams, all the way to global emissions, as some of the fertilizers that are put down are also greenhouse gas emitters when they break down. So there's a lot of opportunity here to bring to bear fresh thinking, new ideas, and again, innovation to help us achieve our multiple goals, our simultaneous interest in having safe drinking water, healthy food, and a habitable planet. And I think nothing less than all of that taken as a package is going to be satisfactory to most people.
Let me go back to your book for a second and talk about the categories of ideas. You touched on this earlier, but let me ask you to expand a bit. The categories of ideas that constitute the 40 big ideas for a sustainable future?
Sure. So, we have a array of things here. Some books focus only on technology, and we have some technologies. We've talked about the importance already of new technologies for energy, but we also look at artificial intelligence and machine learning,
Right.
and a whole array of technologies that might actually allow us to do our environmental work, our environmental protection efforts more effectively and at lower cost. So we think technology is a whole category. And then there's concepts, there's ways to think about problems. And we see big opportunities there as well. There's ideas like industrial ecology, the idea that you can bring things together in a more integrated way. There's the importance of systems thinking, of systems design, and of making sure products are designed at their outset for good recyclability at the end of their life. So again, there's a conceptual framework. And then there are approaches, there are policy strategies. And so we think all of these need to be part of the mix. And the fresh thinking should come in all those categories across the board.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of big data and artificial intelligence in terms of environmental protection and sustainability?
Well, one of the interesting things, Jeff, and you know this, and I suspect all of the listeners know this, is that our world has been completely transformed by information technology and big data in almost every domain in the last 20 or 30 years. No business today markets the way it did 20 or 30 years ago. No baseball team picks players the way it used to, with the old
Right.
scouts chewing tobacco and saying, yeah, that guy's got it. No, he doesn't have it. They look at data. We've all learned the lesson of Moneyball and Billy Bean. You got to watch the numbers. And if you systematically pay attention, you're going to end up with better results than somebody who thinks they can get it all from intuition. So we know that big data has provided breakthroughs in almost every domain of society. And yet I would argue the environmental arena is curiously unaffected. And I would argue it's because, this is my own analysis, again, reflected in the book in a number of chapters, that we've been stuck in a certain gear. We have had a political breakdown, a bitter partisan divide about how to move forward on the environment. So we're stuck with our approaches from 2 and 3 and 4 decades ago, unlike almost every other field of work. So it's time for the environmental community, the environmental world that's been developed, to step up and bring on board machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, information technology, the information and communications technology that allow us to instantaneously connect questions and answers, build markets, all of that that's been so transformative in every other aspect of life. Let's bring that to bear. Let's marry those technologies to our environmental challenges and really drive that as an agenda for improved results for a sustainable future.
Let me switch gears a little bit. I mean, a major issue facing all of us is COVID-19. What effect has COVID-19 had on the way we do business and prospects for environmentalism presently and in the future? Has it taught us things that we didn't know that we now know that we should address?
Well, I think, Jeff, it's reminded us of some things we knew or should have known and perhaps need to pay more attention to, such as the fact you need to have good science underpinnings for your policy frameworks. And I think we've long known that science matters, good data matters, good analysis matters, good risk-benefit calculations matter. And that's become ever more clear with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I hope that what we will see coming out of this challenging time is a recommitment to good science and good analysis to underpin policy choices. But I think it's also reminded us that we can't put all of our effort, all of our money into any one direction. We are going to see an increased competition for limited public resources in the years ahead, because we're going to need to rebuild our public health system, rebuild our economy, put people back to work. And there's a lot of emphasis, a lot of priority rightfully put on getting people jobs, getting people's lives back together. So environmental opportunities are going to have to either align themselves with some of those other agendas or compete for limited resources. And it's also going to mean, I think, that we're going to look more carefully at where programs might do double duty, address more than one issue at a time. And I think in that regard, we should be looking at investments in environmental infrastructure, whether that's drinking water systems, sewage treatment plants, new kinds of power plants, all of that could be part of a jobs program that builds us a clean energy and clean technology infrastructure for the next generation, but also helps us address our sustainability crisis. So if we can address public health issues, economic imperatives, and our environmental challenges all at once, you're going to have a lot more political support swinging behind that agenda.
So let me build on that, because COVID certainly creates the example in terms of going forward. How do we reduce, two questions, how do we reduce the level of contentiousness over science so that we can have a dialogue that's not partisan in nature? And the second related question is the role of the international community in dealing with environmental challenges. We've heard COVID referred to as the China virus. How do we work internationally to assure that everybody is tuned in with the latest developments, be they positive or negative, so that we can address them? So two questions: contentiousness and internationalism.
So my own view, based on now 30 plus years of working on climate change and sustainability issues more broadly, is that it's actually not so much a dispute over science as it is over the policy implications of the science. And the thought that, and this is where I think both parties are going to need to step up to an opportunity now that we're moving forward past our recent election, to really think about what we can do together. And I think it means that the answer that is all going to be more command and control, commands from government, mandates from the federal government, is not a good path forward. And I think we're going to see at least one party needing to give on that. And there is going to need to be, in the alternative, a recognition that the science here is real, not without uncertainty, but real enough that something needs to be done. And I always teach my students at Yale, let's not say that the science of climate change is finished. It's never finished. Science is, in fact, a project of ongoing discovery and refinement of theory. So it's not all done, and there will be new discoveries, and we'll get certain questions answered more clearly in the years ahead. But it doesn't mean that there are some ongoing uncertainties, that we don't know enough to know we have a problem and that we should take action. So I think if the policy pathway forward were more attractive to the Republicans, there would be less in the way of worry about the science and the uncertainties. And I think from the Democratic side, if there was more focus on delivering an economically vibrant future, as well as a sustainable and environmentally sound one, and one that took seriously the risk that environmental investments could come at too high a price, and therefore tried to make them as cost effective and as far reaching as possible, you would find more Republicans say, yeah, that's the kind of policy I can sign up to. So I'm a believer, and perhaps I'm overly optimistic, that there is that kind of an up the middle path waiting to be achieved. Everybody's going to have to give a little bit, move off some of the kind of lock-in of the last decade or two on climate change in particular. But I do see us with some pathways forward that I hope will have leadership to move us toward and really deliver us on a new trajectory towards a sustainable future in ways that take seriously the foundational concerns of both parties, so that no one feels like they're having to give too much to join a consensus on what I call the up the middle strategy.
So that's very helpful and very optimistic. In terms of our country's role in the international community, how can we work with other countries to achieve these objectives and take advantage of the ideas they may come up with? We don't have the answer to everything here in this country.
So you're absolutely right. And as I mentioned earlier, climate change is inescapably a global problem because the emissions from anywhere affect everywhere. So even if we were in our own nation to do an incredible job to move ourselves to a zero emissions future or a net zero, taking advantage, Jeff, of the opportunity you mentioned, which might be some ongoing emissions, but carbon capture to take those emissions out of our atmosphere. It would not be enough to do that in America alone. We need to make sure that China comes along on this agenda, India is along, Brazil is along, Frankly, the entire world has a role to play. Some have a bigger challenge, some smaller, but everybody has a role. And that was one of the major breakthroughs of the 2015 Paris Agreement. That climate change agreement got everyone on the field after the failed and frankly structurally defective original 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change that I was one of the negotiators of. We at the time were unable to get the developing countries enough money to make them feel like they were incentivized to be part of the solution. So the answer was to give them a permission to sit on the sidelines. Turns out, in retrospect, that was a terrible mistake, dividing the world into a so-called Annex 1 list of countries that took on real obligations and an everybody else list of developing countries who were literally invited to observe, but not to take action. So I think the Paris Agreement, by encouraging everyone to do what they can, got 190 plus countries to sign up, 185 of which have now produced their own nationally determined contributions, their own climate action plans. So I think we do have a spirit now that everybody's involved, everybody needs to play a role. But I do think, and it's again my own experience as a negotiator, as a government official, and as a scholar, looking back over what's worked and what hasn't in recent decades, over 50 years, the world does better when America leads. We are a nation of enormous capacity. With America not playing a role, people feel like they don't need to play a role. When America leads, we bring to bear enormous innovation capacity, entrepreneurial capacity, a willingness to try new things, a spirit of can-do results that is frankly an inspiration to the world and critical to global success. So I do think there's a leadership opportunity for the United States to get back out on the field of climate change in a big way, to signal that we're committed. And frankly, as I think everybody knows, there are economic opportunities here as well as environmental gains to be had. We are going to see over time a transition to more electric vehicles, more high efficiency industry, perhaps even the development of new fuels like hydrogen. And I think the folks that can bring those breakthroughs to the marketplace and to deliver them up in a cost-effective and attractive way are going to win lots of new customers. And I very much want the US to be out there competing for that job opportunity set, those profits, those corporate leadership opportunities. And my own view is that when the United States drives towards a goal and crosses divides and brings people together, we are unmatched in our ability to deliver. And I'm very much hoping, and that's the spirit of the Better Planet book, that we can get that creative flow going that brings our full force of national capacity to bear in delivering a sustainable future.
And presumably encouraging international leaders in the field of environmental law to have a dialogue, and perhaps some to want to come to the States to help us develop our own programs and international programs as well, I would assume.
Well, I do think we have to continue to have a global conversation. We need to have ongoing refinement of our international agreements, of the strategies beneath those agreements. And the US always has been good about learning from others. We recognize that there's interesting ideas developed all over the world. One of our great strengths has been to quickly take up new ideas, to put them into practice, and to be willing to shift gears and move into a higher gear at any time there's an opportunity to do so. And so I think we want to be part of that global flow of ideas, the dissemination of best practices, the capturing of new technologies and the moving them into practice, all of which, again, the US has historically been very good at. And I think the world is waiting for us to help gear that process up across all countries and recognize that there will be breakthroughs coming from lots of different directions. And the goal here isn't to hold them close, but rather to spread them wide across the world and ensure everyone's got access to those best practices.
So your book talks about 40 big ideas, and we've talked about some that might require legislation to at least be facilitated. What are some of the ideas discussed in your book that you think business might be interested in adopting, that they could go forward with in the absence of legislation that might be beneficial to them?
So I think the real answer is that many businesses have come to believe that they can be sustainability solutions providers. And by not only solving their own energy or environment or greenhouse gas emissions challenges, they can actually solve their customers' challenges. And in doing so, step ahead of the competition. So I think there's a growing recognition in the business world. And by the way, lots of the essays address this. My own essay to some extent. Carter Roberts from the World Wildlife Fund is calling on business to step up in new and better ways. There's a whole series of essays that reflect this. And I think, that's the reality, that there are big ideas for the business community to be part of the solutions here. And that companies that are already doing that are finding themselves advantaged in the marketplace. And then there's, challenging concepts that are overarching that are going to require us to do more as a society. Lots of questions around equity, around structural inequality, around how we ensure that we bring to bear all of the talent of society and don't leave anyone behind, don't leave any gender behind, don't leave any race behind, don't leave disadvantaged people of any sort, and really capture all of the talent. And I think that's a part of the business challenge as well. Businesses are finding that companies that really do the most to advance all of their talent are seeing themselves move to the front of the pack. And again, one more thing I want to mention in that regard, the sort of overarching story, is the importance of communications, of the dialogue around these issues. Jeff, you've raised that a couple of times, but let me put a finer point on it. A beautiful essay by Tony Lyserowitz points out that how engaged people are in wanting to take action on sustainability broadly, or climate change in particular, depends in part on the words that you talk to them about.
Right.
You've got to make this connect to people on words they understand, make them understand, help them understand the science in a way that they can make sense of it. And perhaps, I guess I was going to say my favorite essay, but any editor of a book with 40 essays, like any parent, a parent can't have a favorite child. An editor of a book with 40 essays can't have a favorite essay. But I will tell you that Thomas Easley's essay on hip hop sustainability has gotten great interest out across the country as I've been talking about the Better Planet book. And Thomas Easley is a dean at Yale, but he's also a hip hop artist. And what he has made clear is that when he sings about sustainability and raps about the importance of climate change, he is pulling an audience into the conversation that has not felt engaged. And it is critical that we do that with so many parts of our society that have not felt that this was their problem, their issue, and needed their action. Because in addition to work at the business scale, at the government scale, there is the individual scale. We all have a role to play. And I think Thomas Easley reminds us every community needs to be brought into the discussion, feel like this is their issue, and that the story was brought to them on terms that they can make sense of, that they can connect with and are engaged and energized by. And so I think this communications part of the picture, which a number of our essays in the book talk about, is also essential for progress in delivering a sustainable future.
So you've talked about any number of different ideas and approaches for the future, many of which, well, most of which are pretty exciting. I take it bottom line, you're pretty optimistic about the future. Is that correct?
Jeff, I have lived through enough in the way of ups and downs that I sometimes think of myself as a short-term pessimist, but a long-term optimist. And I do think the last year has been discouraging for any number of reasons. A very tough public health situation, an economic collapse, the likes of which, I have never seen in my lifetime. And I know people who've lost jobs and are hurting. So I know we have a society that needs to be uplifted. And one could have been discouraged. I, in fact, have been at times about the sustainability picture over the last year. But I'm now looking forward, and I'm looking forward with a sense of optimism and looking forward to the prospect that we are going to be able to pull forward across these multiple challenges, the pandemic challenge, the economic challenge, the societal transformation challenge, and the sustainability imperative, which is what I've called it. I think we must build a more sustainable society. And the book is about how to do it and recognize that there's lots of foundations on which to build. And we should unleash businesses and individuals and communities and non-governmental organizations and communities to take up whatever part of that agenda they're best positioned to move on, and have lots of people play lots of different roles, all of which come together in a national program of progress.
Well, that sounds like an exciting and very optimistic future for all of us. I hope that your long-term optimism is certainly realized. And I think you're right to be pessimistic in the short term, but I think maybe we are rounding a bend and moving forward in the area of environmentalism and sustainability, driven by the marketplace, but with real opportunities for the government to step in and facilitate those developments. Anything else you'd like to add or talk to our audience about?
You've really covered a lot of ground, and let me just say that you're quite right that there's important new roles for business, and as the role of government is changing, it doesn't mean government leaves the field of leadership on the environment. It means how it delivers that leadership can change. And I think we still need government to create the incentives, to spur the innovation, to inspire people to be part of the education process, sharing best practices and helping us all be that more sustainable person, that more sustainable community, that more sustainable company. So lots of roles for all of us in moving us to this sustainable future. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about this book, A Better Planet, 40 Big Ideas for a Sustainable Future, available wherever you buy books or through Yale University Press. And again, it's got lots of ideas, something for everyone. And as we look out to the holidays, a great opportunity for that young person who's looking for inspiration, or for that senior who's really wondering what are his or her grandchildren doing. So this is a great moment to get lots more people into the conversation that we've had, and I hope share thinking about what it's going to take to deliver that sustainable future.
Well, Dan, I very much appreciate it. And I think, your book, A Better Planet, 40 Big Ideas for a Sustainable Future, helps us continue that dialogue and include more people in it. And I encourage everyone who is watching this program to pick up the book. It's fairly inexpensive and will open your eyes to a lot of ideas and concepts that perhaps we hadn't thought about before. Well, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank EarthX TV, Trammell Crow, for making all this possible. It's been my pleasure, and thank you for taking the time to visit with us.
My pleasure. Thank you all very much.